She crashed my engagement, yanked my hair in front of both families, screamed that the proposal didn't count without her blessing, and somehow thought she was the victim. So I made sure everyone finally saw exactly who she really was. The first thing I felt was the snap, not pain. That came half a second later. First, it was just the pull, sudden and violent, like someone had grabbed a fistful of my future and yanked it backward. My ponytail went tight, my neck whipped, my heels left the ground for a moment, and then Marcus's hands were on my arms, catching me before I went down, and I looked up at him and his face was doing something I had never seen it do before. He wasn't confused, he wasn't surprised. He was looking past me with an expression that was somewhere between devastation and a kind of grim recognition, like a man who had spent years avoiding the sight of something and had finally, unavoidably, been forced to look directly at it. I turned around. Natalie was standing 3 feet away in a green silk dress she had no business wearing to someone else's moment. Her chest was heaving. Her mascara was already moving. Her hand was still half raised, fingers open, like she hadn't quite decided yet whether to reach for me again or let the gesture stand on its own. Around us, the garden path of Meridian House, this beautiful old colonial event space in Westfield, New Jersey that Marcus had spent 3 months secretly reserving, had gone completely silent. String lights hung between the elm trees. A string quartet that Marcus had hired was frozen mid-bow, petals from the centerpieces scattered along the stone path, and Natalie stood in the middle of all of it like she had every right to be there. "The proposal doesn't count," she said. Her voice cracked, but her eyes did not. "I didn't approve it. Marcus, I didn't approve it." She turned to him like I wasn't standing 2 feet away, like I was furniture she'd already moved past. "You promised me," she said. "You promised me we'd always be best friends. She's going to take you away, and you're going to let her." Both families came running out from the inside dining room where they'd been waiting. His mother, his sister, his aunt, my mother, my father, my brother Darius, 2 restaurant managers, and a security guard who looked like he'd hoped for a quieter Saturday. The string quartet finally lowered their instruments. One of the violinists took a very careful step backward. Marcus held me with one arm and raised the other toward Natalie, palm out, the way you'd try to calm something wild. "Natalie," he said, "stop." She did not stop. She started listing things. His father missing his high school graduation, some 3 a.m. hospital run in 2019, a beach trip in the Outer Banks where she appeared in literally every photograph. She was itemizing her investment in him like she was presenting receipts for a refund. And somewhere in the middle of it, the security guard took her gently by the elbow and began walking her back toward the restaurant entrance. She went, still talking, her voice bouncing off the elm trees until it faded into the sound of the door swinging shut behind her. Marcus looked at me. The ring was still in his hand. "Can I finish?" he said. I laughed. I don't know what else I could have done. I laughed until my eyes were wet, and then I said yes, not to that question, but to the real one. He slipped the ring on my finger, and everyone on the garden path started clapping, and my mother grabbed my father's arm, and Darius made a noise that I'm choosing to remember as dignified. We went inside. Marcus proposed again in front of both families, clean and uninterrupted, because he needed to do it right, and so did I. The ring was a vintage-cut sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in white gold, and I remember looking at it under the restaurant lights, thinking that there was going to be so much joy ahead of us. I also knew, in a way I could not yet fully articulate, that Natalie was not finished. I should go back. I should explain who Natalie was before she was the woman who grabbed my hair in a restaurant garden, because she did not start as a villain. She started as a fact of Marcus's life the same way his childhood apartment in Rahway was a fact, or the way his preference for dark roast coffee was a fact. She was simply there, woven into the history of him so tightly that when I arrived, I had to learn to exist around her before I ever thought to question why. Marcus and I met in October of 2020 at a pharmaceutical company in Parsippany, where we were both in account management. I was 29, he was 32. He was quiet in the way that people who have done a lot of interior work tend to be quiet, deliberate, not withdrawn. He fixed the printer on my first week when the IT ticket I'd submitted had gone unanswered for 3 days. He lent me his good pens without making a thing of it. We started getting lunch together in February of 2021 and were officially together by April. He told me about Natalie on our 3rd date. "She's my best friend," he said. "We've known each other since we were 17. She can be a lot, but she's loyal. I need you to know that going in." I thought that was a reasonable thing to say. I had friends from high school too. I thought I understood. The first time he introduced us was in June of 2021 at a backyard cookout at his cousin Devin's place in Montclair. Natalie arrived in a white sundress and sunglasses and hugged Marcus for what I counted. And yes, I counted. As 11 seconds before she turned to me, she looked me over the way a customs agent looks at a passport. Then she smiled and said, with complete pleasantness, "You're not really his type." She spent the next 30 minutes explaining his romantic history to me while Marcus was at the grill. The girl from Rutgers who couldn't handle how emotionally available he was. The woman from his gym who got too competitive. The flight attendant who didn't understand his work schedule. Natalie had been there for the ending of every single one. She framed this as loyalty. As I listened, I felt something else entirely, but I couldn't name it yet. Marcus joined us, and Natalie immediately linked her arm through his and pulled him toward another conversation, and I stood there holding a paper plate and thinking, this is going to require more patience than I expected. I gave it patience for almost a year. The texts were constant, not emergencies, never actual emergencies. Inside jokes that required context I didn't have, random observations, opinions on dresses she was considering, spider problems. Once, at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, she called him because she couldn't decide between 2 fonts for a work presentation. He took the call. I lay in the dark next to him him and stared at the ceiling and said nothing. When I eventually said something, gently, over breakfast a few days later, he looked genuinely surprised. She just calls when she needs to think something through, he said. It doesn't mean anything. I told him I understood. I wasn't sure I did. The appearances were harder to explain away. The same restaurant on a night we hadn't mentioned to anyone. The same bowling alley in Kenilworth that we'd chosen specifically because neither of us had ever been there. I don't know how she knew where we'd be. I asked Marcus once and he said she probably just wanted to say hi. I started choosing our plans more carefully. She still appeared. When we moved in together in March of 2022, a 2-bedroom in Summit that we spent 4 weeks negotiating over before Marcus finally agreed the second bedroom did not need to be a dedicated trophy room. Natalie showed up the first day. She brought a housewarming gift. It had Marcus's name on it, just his. She stood in our apartment for 3 hours and reorganized his side of things with the focused intensity of someone correcting a wrong. Cups in the wrong cabinet. Work shirts hanging next to gym shirts. College trophies from Keene University boxed up and stacked when they should have been displayed. She unpacked his boxes with running commentary. Oh, I remember when he got this. We were at the Prudential Center. Marcus, do you remember? It was your birthday. I sat on the couch and watched my own apartment become a Natalie museum. Then came Sundays. Sunday breakfast became her standing tradition by a process I still don't fully understand. It started with 1 visit, then a second. Then by June, she was just arriving at 9:30 every week, like someone who had a key, though she did not have a key. She cooked in my kitchen, left the mess. If I'd already started making breakfast when she arrived, she would remake it. Not loudly, not cruelly, just practically, the way you'd correct an error. Eggs needed to be done this way. Marcus liked his toast darker. When I said something to Marcus, privately, he told me I was reading into it. When I said something to Natalie, she laughed and touched my arm and said, real couples don't need to sit together every single minute. You don't have to feel threatened by me. I was not thrilled by the implication that the problem was mine. There was one Sunday in September of 2022 that I think about sometimes. Natalie had arrived with croissants and was settled on the couch between us, her feet in Marcus's lap, going through something on her phone. I'd reached across her to hand Marcus his coffee, the mug he liked, the blue one, which happened to be on her side, and my arm had grazed her shoulder. She looked up and gave me a smile that was patient and tired at the same time. You know, she said, I've been his best friend for 15 years. You've been with him for 18 months. I'm not going anywhere. She said it like a fact, like a weather report. Marcus didn't say anything. I went to the kitchen and stood over the sink for a long time. He started planning the proposal in November of 2022. I didn't know it then. What I knew was that Natalie got worse in November. She grabbed his arm when we walked places. She whispered things in his ear at group dinners. Not secretly, just close enough that I could see it happening but not hear what was said. She posted a string of throwback photos on Instagram. The 2 of them at prom. The 2 of them at his college graduation. The 2 of them at some beach house rental with matching sunburns and sunglasses pushed up on their foreheads. She captioned the last one. Some friendships last forever, heart. I found out through Devin's girlfriend Priya, who texted me a screenshot with no additional comment. Then Priya mentioned something else. She said Natalie had changed Marcus's contact name in her phone to my person. She made sure I saw it. She held up her phone at Devin's birthday dinner in December and laughed about something Marcus had texted her, and the name was right there in the notification bar. My person. She looked at me when she laughed, not in a confrontational way, in a way that said, I want you to know this exists. I want it to take up space in your head. It worked. I won't pretend it didn't. What I didn't know in December was that Marcus had already put the deposit down on the ring. He'd gone to an estate jeweler in Maplewood that his mother had recommended, looked at 37 rings across 4 visits, and selected the sapphire. He told me later that he'd known which ring it was the moment he saw it, but he went back 3 more times just to be sure he wasn't getting swept up in the moment. That's Marcus. That's exactly who he is. He told Natalie he was planning to propose. I found this out later. At the time, I only knew that December was the worst month since we'd moved in together. Natalie called him crying twice about things she wouldn't explain fully. She showed up unannounced on a Wednesday night, not a Sunday, a Wednesday, with takeout from a Thai place we'd been to together once, Marcus and I on our first real date. I don't think that was coincidence. I stood in my own doorway and watched her set out containers on my kitchen table and wondered at what point a person stops being a friend and starts being a siege. But I said nothing because Marcus was happy that December. Quieter than usual in the way people get when they're holding something they don't want to spill. I noticed it. I thought maybe he'd gotten a promotion or was working through something personal. I gave him his space. He booked Meridian House in early January. He told both families separately and swore them to silence. He told me we were celebrating my promotion at Dunmore and Associates. I had moved up to senior account director in October. I wore the green dress that my mother bought me for my college graduation because it still fit, and I felt good in it. Natalie wore green silk. In the weeks after the proposal, I had a lot of time to think about that coincidence. Maybe it wasn't one. Priya told me later that Devin had made an offhand comment about the restaurant, Meridian House, the garden path, within earshot of Natalie at a group dinner 3 days before. She must have dressed to match on purpose, or she heard about my dress somehow. I don't know. By then, I was trying very hard not to build a conspiracy in my head, because building conspiracies was what she wanted me to do. It kept me occupied and it kept me reactive. Natalie was not invited to the wedding. That was not a discussion. Marcus and I agreed on this the morning after the proposal, over coffee in our kitchen while the ring kept catching the light on my finger and startling me. He brought it up. He said her name and then said, I don't want her there. I told him I agreed. He nodded and poured his coffee and we moved on, the way you move on from something that has finally, conclusively been resolved. 2 months later, in March, Natalie got engaged to a man named Rob Callahan. She announced it on Instagram with a photo of a round-cut diamond solitaire and a caption about not settling. She'd been dating Rob for 4 months. I know because the math was not subtle. She scheduled her wedding for June 14th. Our wedding was June 21st. She sent Marcus a formal invitation with a handwritten note inside asking him to be her man of honor. She said she needed him by her side on the most important day of her life. She said Rob understood. She said it would mean everything. Marcus held the envelope over the kitchen trash can and let it fall. We did not discuss it. My cousin Tamara worked events coordination at the Essex County Country Club where Natalie held her reception. Tamara called me the Sunday after, around noon, voice carefully neutral in the way it gets when she's about to tell me something she knows will land badly. She talked about Marcus all night, Tamara said. I mean all night. She compared Rob's toast to how Marcus gives toasts. She said Marcus would have danced better. She told the photographer that the man of honor was supposed to stand differently and showed him a photo of Marcus at Devon's wedding as a reference. Tamara paused. Rob left his own reception at 9:30, just got in the car and drove away. His groomsmen found him at a bar in Short Hills. The divorce was filed in September, 18 weeks after the wedding. Our wedding was June 21st, a Saturday. Southgate Manor in Randolph. 112 guests. My mother cried through the entire ceremony in a way that was beautiful and also slightly alarming. Marcus said his vows without notes, which was something I had not expected, and I held onto his hands through the whole thing because I needed something to do with myself while he talked, or I was going to fall apart completely. We were in Tuscany for 10 days. We came back in early July. And on August 9th, which was our first paper anniversary, we celebrated monthly that first year, the way new married people do when they're still a little disbelieving. I answered the front door of our house in Summit at 6:15 in the evening and found Natalie on the porch. She was holding a box, small, square, wrapped in navy paper with a thin white ribbon. Marcus's name was written on the tag in her handwriting, the same looping script I recognized from Sunday mornings when she would leave passive-aggressive grocery lists on our counter. She was wearing a cream blouse and black slacks and the same perfume that had settled into our couch cushions for 2 years of Sunday breakfasts. She smiled when she saw me. "Is Marcus home?" she said. I stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. "You need to leave," I said. She looked past me, physically moved her gaze around my shoulder like I was a door she hadn't opened yet. "Marcus," she called, bright voice, casual, like she was arriving for a Sunday she'd been invited to. He came from the kitchen, dish towel over his shoulder. He saw her. He stopped. Something in his face settled, not into anger but into something older and heavier. The expression of a man setting down something he'd been carrying for a long time. Natalie's face changed the moment she read his expression. The smile softened into something more vulnerable. Then the tears came. They came fast and practiced in the way things do when they have been deployed many times before. She started talking. She was lost without him. The divorce had been devastating. She had no one. He was the only person who truly knew her. She had made a mistake letting things get this far. She was sorry. She was so sorry. She needed him to just talk to her for a few minutes. Just a few minutes. She listed her receipts. His dad missing graduation. The 3 a.m. drive to Centra State Medical in 2019 when she thought she was having a cardiac event, and it turned out to be a panic attack, but she hadn't known that yet, and he'd sat with her in the waiting room until 4 in the morning. The Outer Banks trip in 2018 where she'd handled everything when the rental had a sewage problem and they'd had to move hotels at midnight. She knew exactly how long to pause after each one. Marcus listened. He did not move from the hallway. He did not reach for her. He let the list finish. "Natalie," he said. She looked up. "You shouldn't have come here." The tears stopped. Instantly. Not gradually. Stopped. The way a faucet stops when you turn the handle all the way closed. Her face went still, and then it rearranged itself into something that was not grief and not anger, but was a very specific kind of calculation. I had seen it before. I had seen it in the moment after Marcus brushed her hand off his shoulder in the garden at Meridian House, right before she reached for my hair. It was the face of someone deciding on their next move. She looked at the gift box in her hand. Then she looked at me, then at Marcus. "I see," she said. "You've been fully converted." She turned and walked to her car. She did not look back. I want to explain what happened in the 2 weeks after that visit, because this is the part I almost didn't find out. The part that recontextualized everything. Marcus's sister, Renee, called me on a Tuesday afternoon 3 days after Natalie's porch visit. Renee is 4 years older than Marcus, lives in East Orange, and has always treated me with a careful warmth that I interpreted as reserve, but that I now understand was just her being thorough about trust. She doesn't extend it quickly. She extended it to me by the following March, and when it came, it was real, and I valued it. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to know I've been sitting with whether to tell you for a long time, and I'm telling you now because she showed up at your house." She told me that in November of 2022, the same month Marcus was planning the proposal, the same month Natalie started getting worse, Natalie had called Renee. She'd called to try to get Renee to convince Marcus not to propose. She said she thought I was wrong for him. She said the relationship was moving too fast. She said Marcus had always made his best decisions when Natalie was involved, and this was a decision she hadn't been consulted on. Renee told her no. Natalie then called Marcus's mother. His mother, Beverly, had not told Marcus about the call because she didn't want to put him in the middle of it. She told Renee. They'd both decided to watch and wait, but there was something else. Renee said that after the engagement party, the formal one we held in March of 2023, 2 months after the garden path, Natalie had sent Marcus a letter, handwritten, 12 pages. Renee knew because Marcus had mentioned it to her briefly, and when she asked what it said, he got very quiet and said it was a lot of old stuff he needed to process, and he'd put it somewhere safe. He had never mentioned this letter to me. I sat with that for an hour after I got off the phone with Renee. I sat in our bedroom and looked at the closet, the good closet, the one Marcus used for things he wanted to keep out of daily sight, winter coats, old tax returns, the box his grandfather's watch came in. I opened it. I looked at the shelf. There was a shoebox on the top shelf behind his wedding suit bag. I opened the shoebox. The letter was there, all 12 pages. I won't share all of it. I won't share most of it, but I will tell you that on page 4, Natalie wrote the following. "I know this is not something I'm supposed to say, and I've spent years not saying it, but I love you the way that matters. I always have, and you know that. I think you've always known it, and choosing her knowing that, I need you to sit with that. I need you to decide whether you're making a choice or an escape. Page 9. If you marry her and we lose each other, that is a door that cannot be reopened. I want you to know that. I want that to mean something. Page 12. I've never needed your blessing for anything I've done with my life, but I've always needed to be your person. Tell me I still am. I sat on the bedroom floor for a long time. I thought about every Sunday morning, every whispered thing at dinner, every green silk coincidence. The letter made it retroactively true, not the fantasy of it, but the strategy of it. Natalie had not been acting from grief or confusion or simple possessiveness. She had been acting from a plan that went back further than I knew. The hair pull in the garden wasn't a breakdown. It was a calculation that had passed a point of no return. I put the letter back. Then I thought about what I was going to do. I did not go to Marcus that night. I waited 3 days. I thought about what I wanted the conversation to accomplish and what I did not want it to become. I did not want it to become a demand for explanation or a tribunal about something he'd withheld. I wanted it to be the thing it actually was, which was harder and more necessary. A real conversation about what we were going to do from here. I sat him down on a Thursday night after dinner. I told him about Renee's call. I watched his face. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, I should have told you about the letter. I asked him why he hadn't. He said, because I was ashamed that she'd written it, and I was ashamed that I didn't know what to do with it. And I think I was hoping that if I put it somewhere I didn't look, the situation it described would just resolve itself. I asked him if anything in the letter was true. He looked at me. She loves me the way she's always loved me. That part is probably true. But what she called love has always been, I don't have a better word for it than ownership. She loves the version of me that belonged to her. She's never been interested in the version of me that doesn't. Then he said, I should have drawn that line 10 years ago. I kept not drawing it because I felt guilty and because I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone. I was wrong about that. I know that now. I asked him what he wanted to do. He said, I want to call her in front of you, and I want to say what I should have said a long time ago, and I want you to be there when I say it. I said, okay. We called her on speaker. She answered on the second ring. Marcus spoke clearly and without interruption. He said he had read her letter. He said he understood what she felt and he was not dismissing it. He said he also needed her to understand that what she had done at the engagement at our house in the months and years before had not come from love, but from an unwillingness to accept that love sometimes means releasing someone. He said she had hurt me in ways that were real and documented, and that I had been patient far longer than most people would have been. He said they were not able to continue a friendship while she was unwilling to acknowledge any of this. He said he hoped genuinely that she found what she was looking for, and he said goodbye. She was silent through almost all of it. At the end, she said, you'll regret this. He said, I don't think I will. He hung up. I looked at him across the kitchen table. He looked tired in the way that people look when they've finally done something they should have done years ago, and the relief and the grief are arriving simultaneously. I'm sorry, he said. I told him I knew. It did not end there, of course. Nothing like this ends cleanly. Natalie called Devin 3 times in the 2 weeks after that phone call. Devin is conflict averse in the way that large, good-natured men sometimes are, and each time he tried to remain neutral, which in practice meant he mostly listened and said, yeah, that's rough, until she wore herself out. He told us about the calls. He was apologetic about it in a way that was unnecessary but appreciated. She sent a card to Beverly, Marcus's mother, with a very long, very carefully written note about how she was worried about Marcus, that she felt he had changed in ways that concerned her, that she hoped Beverly was paying attention. Beverly called me to read it to me. Then she said, I want you to know I've watched my son carefully for 3 years. He's happier than I have ever seen him. Then she said, she doesn't know how to let something be someone else's. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't have to. Priya reached out to me in September. She said Natalie had contacted her asking if I'd ever done anything that crossed a line in my relationship with Marcus. Fishing, Priya said, for ammunition. Priya told her she had nothing to report. Priya also told her to stop. There was a period of about 6 weeks in the fall where I felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has won the argument but still has to live next to the noise it made. I woke up some mornings thinking about the letter and the 12 pages and what it had meant for Natalie to write it and what it had meant for Marcus to put it in a shoebox instead of bringing it to me. I don't want to overstate this. My marriage was not in jeopardy. My husband's commitment was not in question. But there is a kind of grief that comes from learning that something you thought was secure was always slightly less so than you knew. That you had been living in a house where a wall you didn't know about had been under pressure for years. The wall held. The house was fine. But knowing it had been under pressure changes the way you listen at night. I gave myself permission to grieve that for a while. I also started seeing a therapist named Dr. Jana Kessler in October, whom I found through my employee assistance program and who charged me a copay of $35 and was worth approximately 10,000 times that. She helped me understand the difference between processing something and carrying it. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced with Natalie wasn't just friction between a partner's friend and a new girlfriend. It was a sustained campaign by someone in genuine psychological pain who had aimed that pain very precisely at me for 3 years. That didn't make it acceptable, but understanding it made it less personal, made it hers instead of mine. Natalie moved to Portland in December. A fresh start, someone said. I heard this through Devin. I didn't look her up. I don't follow her. I wish her no specific harm, and I hope, in the vague and somewhat distant way you hope for things you are no longer required to care about, that she found what she needed. I'm writing this in the spring. We live in the same house in Summit. The second bedroom is no longer a trophy room debate. It's a nursery now, still in progress. Walls the color of very pale sage, a rug we spent 2 hours choosing and then immediately second-guessed and then went back to because it was right the first time. Marcus assembled the crib on a Saturday in March. He did it methodically and with a level of focus that I recognized from the story he told me about going back to look at the ring 3 more times before buying it. He was making sure. I look at him sometimes, across the kitchen or over the top of a book or at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep, and I think about the garden path at Meridian House, the string lights, the frozen string quartet, the moment after the ring was on my finger, and before the families came running out, when it was just us and the petals and the noise Natalie was making as the security guard walked her away. He looked at me in that moment and his face said, "I'm sorry that happened. And also, I'm still here." Both of those things were true. Both of them still are. I think about the word that Natalie used in her letter, person, my person, as if belonging to someone is a zero-sum game, as if love is a territory and not a practice. She could not understand, could not make herself understand, that Marcus loving me did not subtract from anything she'd been given. It just meant the ownership she felt had never been real. Some things I lost, I'll acknowledge. I lost the version of this story where Natalie was simply a complicated friend who found her way through this. I lost the version where the friendship reconstituted itself into something healthy after the engagement. I lost some innocence about what people who feel entitled to someone are capable of. That last one matters. It made me harder in ways I'm still untangling. And Marcus lost something too. He doesn't say it often, but I know that 15 years is real, even when the relationship inside those years was less than what it appeared to be. He lost someone he grew up alongside. He lost the specific comfort of a person who knew his history the way only time can give you. He doesn't mourn it loudly. He moves through it, but I see him sometimes close a thought before it fully forms, and I know what the thought was. The title of this story is what they used to call a trigger warning, a preview, a summary of the worst day in what turned out to be a good story. But what I want to leave you with is this. The proposal counts. It counted in the garden with petals on the ground and a frozen string quartet and a woman screaming that it needed her approval to be real. It counted because Marcus went back for it, stood up and steadied me, and then knelt again inside while both families watched, and said the rest of what he'd been saying when we were interrupted. The ring was on my finger either way, but he needed to finish. He needed to say it all the way through, uninterrupted, and he did. No one's blessing was required. It never was.